Tell us about woke unions.
Yeah, well, I kind of came across that. I mean, we're all kind of familiar with trade unions, and they have that kind of place in the system. I mean, probably some of the people in business and management weren't that crazy about them, but they had a kind of defined set of issues. They asked for a bit more pay, better terms and conditions. They protected people who they felt being unfairly treated, bit of better food in the canteen, all that kind of usual stuff. And I think although the people in management might not always like it, they can negotiate. They can sit down, they can have some beer, they can have some sandwiches, they got a cup of tea, they could work something out, and it was kind of a process by which you kind of split up the revenues between the management and the workers and the shareholders and all the different people in the company. But you kind of get these weird new unions emerging, particularly places like Apple and Google, and they have extremely odd demands. They're basically completely woke unions. So, as for example, they demand that they mustn't ever work on any projects that don't coincide with their values. That they get treated with respect, that the entire company, all the kind of usual woke stuff about we know the kind of issues that they're kind of interested in. And I think the problem with that is that it's not like the old unions. I mean, obviously, people are entitled to have their say about where they work, but the old unions, they were talking about practical issues to do with the workplace. It's like how much you get paid, what the hours are, all that kind of stuff that you can negotiate over. And these unions are talking about basically worldviews. It's kind of revolutionary. It's a kind of permanent cultural revolution. And my point was that it was basically making a lot of big companies fundamentally ungovernable. And I think we're starting to see that. That's the problem with them.
Yes, and it could impact. It could impact their business model too if they've got to accommodate these crazy political views.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think we're starting to see it. It's not becoming critical yet, and obviously these big tech starting a lot in the tech industry because Silicon Valley is the kind of center of the whole woke culture. But you're starting to see it in we saw the story a few months ago, the guy at KPMG who got fired because he kind of popped up saying he thought unconscious bias trading was I won't repeat the word that he used because even at this time it's probably fine this time of night, isn't it? But never mind. He's kind of dismissing it as nonsense and saying people should pull themselves together a little bit, and then he ends up getting fired because the staff find that unacceptable. And I think it's seeping through. We see it starting in the universities, in the schools, and now because I guess as generations of 20-somethings come into the workforce, they're bringing the same kind of culture into companies, and we've seen the damaging effects that it has in universities. And we're going to see very damaging effects, I think, in companies. We're going to see a lot of companies which have become virtually impossible to manage.
It's a legal minefield.
What that's going to do to the business model. If you can't manage the business, it's not going to do very well, is it?
A legal minefield and a logistical minefield if you've got to worry about whether you've misgendered an employee or triggered them in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the range of demands are so sort of bizarre and so sort of, that you can't really cope with them. I mean, how can people choose, what projects they work with, whether they align with their values? How do I know what somebody's, if I'm trying to manage an organization like that, how do I know what's, a bunch of software engineers, on the 24th floor? How do I know what their values are? How do I know what their project, and what's it got to do with them? I mean, you can't have a bunch of people within companies. You get to say, a shop's not going to sell products. They're not going to sell a pair of jeans to you, Mark, because you don't align with their values, or they're not going to sell you a tie or a shirt. You get a Specsavers if that's where you buy your glasses. They say, hey, you probably go somewhere much posher than that. I can tell you got fancy glasses, but they go and say, oh no, we can't serve you because we're not aligned with your values. You got to do a values check before you go into the supermarket, before you go get your car fixed at the garage. It's just become completely ridiculous, and it becomes completely ungovernable. And we've seen it in the universities, but in the sense, universities aren't that important to the economy. They're quite big businesses themselves and important to students, but they don't impact on the wider economy. But as it seeps out into the wider economy, I think it's going to be a big problem. And I think what companies have to do is clamp down on it. And they have to be absolutely clear that you can't bring that. People... And a few companies in the tech space, have actually started to do it. They said no politics at work. We can all have our own political views, and we can all we can all watch TV channels like this and argue about it, and go onto chat forums and on Twitter and argue about it. That's absolutely fine. But when you go into your workplace, unless it's GBNews, I guess, or a newspaper, But if you go into a normal workplace, like, an optician's or a dentist or a garage or, whatever it is, consultancy, you just park that. You leave that for after work or your private life, your political views, that's separate, but you're making a product and you kind of get on with that.
Well, yes, I understand that Dominic Cummings, I've never been a great cheerleader for him, but he actually was refused service in a Scottish hotel because of his position on Brexit.
That, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's another good example, isn't it, of the kind of, and he, he likes to argue, so I believe I read the rest of the story. He sat down for 3 hours.
3 hours.
And had a good old natter about it. I don't think he brought them round, but, never mind. But again, it's ridiculous. You go into a hotel or a restaurant, what your political views, with very few exceptions, right out on the very, very fringes, really shouldn't matter. And you can't bring this stuff into the workplace. The world has to carry on doing all kinds of stuff. And I think this attempt to politicize, everything that we do is very damaging.
On the spectacles, I am a big fan of Specsavers, but actually these beauties are from Qubits, a British company. They make their frames in Birmingham, I think, and they're very good value. So there you go. But Matthew, thanks for the compliment.
They look good on your mug.
I always buy British.
I have to give you a discount.
Now, Matthew, I hope they do. If Qubits or Specsavers wind up on the FTSE 100 share index, well, actually, they might regret that, because you're suggesting that we need to rethink the FTSE 100 share index and start again.
Yeah, I was writing about that in the Telegraph this morning. The peg for that thought was over in Germany they have the DAX. They have the DAX 30, which is their benchmark index. Has all the biggest German companies, Daimler-Benz and Siemens and Volkswagen, all the kind of names we're familiar with. And they've actually decided to make it's not a huge change. They're making it the DAX 40. Which I suppose 30 to 40, that's quite a big change. Big change if you follow the German stock market, which admittedly not many of us do that closely. But I thought it was interesting, actually, because you look at the FTSE and it's not a great index. And I think sort of financial specialists like me and people who really follow these things closely, they sort of know that. But I think to the ordinary person, the person who's even quite interested, who's reading, a quality newspaper or watching shows like this or listening to the radio, they kind of come on the news and it says the FTSE's up this 70 points or that many points, and they sort of think, well, that's the benchmark, that's the British economy. That's kind of like a little snapshot of the British economy, and actually it's not. It's very, very out of touch with the British economy. It's a rather strange index that's kind of got a whole bunch of legacy companies on it. It's got a lot of oil companies. They haven't been doing great for all kinds of reasons. We don't consume as much as oil as we used to. We're certainly not going to consume as much going forward. New drugs companies that aren't doing very well. Some big tobacco companies. Surprise, surprise, tobacco. That's not the industry of the future. And I don't think it's going to be. And actually, it has almost none of the tech companies. The only really tech company in there at all is Ocado. And even that's not purely tech company. It's a pretty successful company. And my point was that the British economy has actually been doing really well in the last 10 years or so. It's changed a lot. It's become much more entrepreneurial. It's become a lot more dynamic. You can see that, for example, we have more unicorns. Unicorns are startups which are worth $1 billion. They're kind of a measure of the really sort of vibrant new companies. We have more in the UK than any country in the world apart from the United States and China, which obviously a lot bigger than us, but a lot more than India, more than Germany, more than France, more than Canada, other countries. But none of these companies are in the FTSE. A lot of the British companies, a lot of the domestic companies are in the FTSE 250. They're too small to be in the FTSE because they're not global companies, but they're British companies. So the FTSE really reflects companies like Unilever. They hardly got any sales in the UK. They're tiny sales. They're big global businesses, but not growing that fast. So it's become a very, very unrepresentative index. And I think it'd be a good time to change it and come up with something that was much more broader based, that actually gave you a real snapshot of the UK. And an important point on that, of course, just for ordinary people, is the FTSE has been very unsuccessful. 20 years, no growth. It's only a fraction above where it was in 1999. The DAX, for example, 3 times as much as it was over those 20 years, tripled in value, because it actually reflects the German economy. S&P 500 3 times in the United States. The Nasdaq, don't ask. Woof, the graph goes like that. So if you're a pension fund, you just, someone who doesn't follow the markets that closely, they just might be in a tracker fund, track the FTSE. They think that's the British economy. But it's not the British economy. The British economy's been doing fine, but not the FTSE, because it's this really old collection of companies, as I was saying, oil companies, tobacco companies, stuff like that, a lot of declining industries. So I think it would just be a good time to change it, and we could all argue about, what kind of index to come up with. But not that hard. If the Germans could do it, not the most innovative country in the world, we could do it as well, couldn't we?
Briefly, if you can, do you think change will happen?
Hey, everyone does what I say at a column, Mark. Usually, and I write a column, and 3 days later, they're just like the Treasury and the stock.
Here's hoping.
Hey, that guy seems to be onto something. We'll get on and do what he says. Actually, that's sadly that's not quite true. Actually, it doesn't always follow like that. I think it's possible. I think there are a range of different indexes out there. And actually, I might have a word with the editor. Actually, if some of the media stop quoting the FTSE, then it would kind of lose a lot of its power. I think it's because it's ingrained in there. And GBNews, if you start, if you go on to have your business news summary, instead of saying the FTSE's up, 4 points to their, if actually a group of editors and TV people got together and said, we're going to do something different. We're going to quote something different on this channel, on the BBC and the FT and the Telegraph and the Times and the Mail every day, then suddenly the FTSE would kind of lose its magic a little bit. Which is something. So we could, the stock exchange could make it happen if they wanted to. But actually, people elsewhere could make it happen if they just kind of got their heads together and did something.
I think we should look at that in all seriousness. Before we let you go, we can't allow an esteemed economics commentator like yourself not discuss the future. What's your short to medium term prognosis for the British economy, assuming that we're through the worst of the pandemic and there won't be any future national lockdowns?
Wow, big question, Lynn. I think it's doing okay. I think we're coming out of the pandemic quite well. I think, there are some blips on the horizon. I think it'd be a big mistake for the Chancellor to push up taxes. I think the national insurance rise, which has been talked about a lot, is a big mistake. I think tax rises in general are the last thing the UK economy needs. The debt situation, the debt is high, but it's under control. I don't think we should be worrying about it too much. But I think the really interesting thing that's going on is just the kind of, the really interesting thing is the big post-Brexit bounce in wages. That's the really fascinating thing. Labour shortages are obviously bad, but I think that's a supply shock to the market. And, free market works through shocks. It's a disruptive system. And you get, when things change, which they have done, obviously we've had a big change in the labour market with leaving the EU and the end of freedom of movement. We're throwing a big shock at the labour market, but it's not a bad shock, in my view. And actually what you're seeing is going to be, I think it's going to be fascinating. You're seeing, we're seeing really high working class wages going up. We kind of see the lorry drivers and stuff getting 20%, 30% rises. I was talking to somebody at the weekend who has, building sites, electricians who, getting double what they were six months ago. That's a lot of money, and that's going into people's pockets. So it might feed through into inflation a bit. It will do. But what it's certainly going to do is feed through into demand and living standards. You start putting up people's wages 20%, 30%, they feel a bit richer, don't they? Yeah, duh. And they're going to go out and spend a bit more. And they're going to feel better about the economy and they're going to be more confident. And, prices are going up a little bit, but only 2-3%. If you got a 25% pay rise, prices go up 3%. Well, you're feeling good about yourself. Life is fine. So I think that's going to be. I think it's been really interesting, and everyone's talking about it as a problem, which is kind of weird. Why are we talking about wages going up rapidly as a problem? I thought that was a good thing.
Yes.
We should like it. We should like it if people are richer, and particularly people at the bottom end of the earnings scale who haven't had a great 2 decades. White collar workers have done well over the last 2 decades. Blue collar workers haven't done so well. And the people who have to pay them, the bosses who get a lot of media space are like, oh no, this is terrible. We understand it's terrible for them because they've got to shell out a little bit more money at the end of the week. But it's not terrible for the economy for people to have more money. But it's kind of unpredictable and it's a bit volatile. So just think it's going to be really interesting, but we shouldn't think that it's a bad thing.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.